Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Nutrition Plus podcast, where we'll be discussing all things nutrition. And today I have some special guests joining us to talk about all the myths surrounding nutritional information that's being taught throughout the Australian education system. And we will mainly be talking about a provocation that has arisen from a study conducted by Leah and Wright in 2016. They examined the perceptions that young people are having on health and nutrition currently, and the provocation states that many of the students that were interviewed described learning about this balance between foods and exercise in the context of avoiding being overweight and obese. So it is clear that both primary and secondary students get the message, but that bad foods are those high in sugar and fats, so like fast food, junk food, and takeaway food. And good foods seem to be primarily fruits and vegetables. Although this is partially true, it just shows that students in current society have many gaps in their knowledge. And to explain this in more depth, I now invite Kiara Bloomfield to speak. So, hi, Kiara, how are you going?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. So what sort of knowledge do you think these students are missing here?
So with the quote mentioned, it's missing a lot of key points that should be taught in food and nutrition studies. However, through different studies, we can see that there is still a lot of information not being taught to these students. We need to remove the stigma around foods that are inherently good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. The narrowing points of food and nutrition are being lost in this quote. Yes, fast food, junk food, and takeaway food aren't the best for you, but they shouldn't be described as bad. Food and nutrition studies should be giving these students the time and space to gain knowledge about where their food comes from, how it is made, and why they choose it, etc. But relating back to the quote, it sounds like these students are only focusing on a narrow part of food and nutrition studies. Stacey was asked, what does health mean to her? And this was her response. Exercise. Eat healthy fruit and do jogging and running to keep fit. I mean, this is a very broad meaning of health. Eating fruit is healthy and running to keep fit. These students are being taught in a way that won't benefit them in the long run. Some fruits can be full of sugar. You've got mangoes and bananas that are suggested to eat in small amounts and not all the time. It leaves these students confused and limited and creates an entanglement in the curriculum of food and nutrition studies, which ultimately affects the school and teachers. In regard to the curriculum, the Australian Dietary Guidelines should be a focal point in food and nutrition studies. In relation to this provocation, only Guideline 3 is mentioned, which is limit intake of foods containing saturated fats, added sugars, added salt, and alcohol, and this is only mentioned to an extent. Schools and teachers need to come together to create a curriculum that has a focus on all the guidelines together. Guideline 1 is important in maintaining your physical well-being and a healthy weight, whereas Guideline 2 is critical to our youth development, enjoying a wide variety of nutritious food from the 5 food groups. A perfect example of this is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, which lays out the foundations of what to eat and what to eat in moderation. It gives the students a visual of the 5 food groups and allows them to then use this in their everyday lives. Overall, these students have a broad knowledge of what health is and how it impacts on their lives. A whole school approach to food nutrition studies where the wider community is addressed and a detailed food and nutrition policy in schools will not only bring short-term growth in the younger generation, but also institute a healthier mindset, preventing the onset of obesity and chronic disease in later life.
Great, thanks, Kiara. I also have Mel here, who I'd also like to join into this discussion. How are we, Mel?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, great, thank you. So how important do you think the teacher is in this scenario? Like, what sort of role do they play in all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. While on the surface, this statement seems to call out that students understand the difference between good and bad foods, it's vital that teachers comprehend the implications of this understanding for their students. The impacts of this loose understanding are far-reaching. The commentary alludes to the lack of depth in what students have taken away from their studies, highlighting their inability to apply the principles of healthy eating in their own lives. There are several environments that a student is a part of, each with the ability to influence their knowledge about food and nutrition. Some of these environments include social media, peer groups, families, and the one we're talking about today is the school environment. As school is where students spend the majority of their week, teachers are crucial in this dissemination of evidence-based food information, food knowledge, food skills, and positive attitudes for healthy behaviours. Secondary school food and nutrition curricula often offer an accessible means to communicate healthy eating messages with widespread reach among adolescents and their families. According to the Vic Government's Health Promoting Schools framework, a health promoting school is a school community that takes action and places priority in creating an environment that will have the best possible impact on the health of students, staff, and the wider school community. Food, nutrition, and health content appears in 2 learning areas, technologies and health and physical education. And although food and nutrition are only covered in these 2 learning areas of the curriculum, they mainly focus on scientific and instrumental approaches. It's been suggested that an interdisciplinary approach is required in order to serve students better, in order to engage with the complexities of food, its supply and availability, ethics, cultural meanings, and aesthetics. This therefore shows that food and nutrition is something that should be covered in many subjects at school, each with a different focus, but all working together with a whole school approach to enhancing food literacy in students.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mel. So thanks for that. Now, lastly, I just want to invite our last guest speaker, Izzy. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Julia. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So have you got anything to add to this?
I do, yes, thank you. As teachers, we also need to elucidate that this provocation does not include the importance of engaging in regular activity. Regular participation in physical activity is essential for healthy growth and development, and the patterns of physical activity and good dietary intake that are established in childhood are more likely to persist into adulthood. Thus, pairing the Australian Dietary Guidelines with regular physical activity is acknowledged as one of the most important factors for achieving and maintaining a healthy lifestyle throughout childhood, adolescence, and then further into adulthood. More so, as highlighted by Chiara, engaging in regular physical activity will reduce the incidence of health issues, including type 2 diabetes, depression, and obesity during childhood and adolescence, and which will also remain through adulthood, but also chronic diseases which are manifested in adulthood, such as coronary heart disease, stroke, hypertension, osteoporosis, and several cancers. Furthermore, adolescents who partake in incidental exercise, such as those who preference active transport, such as walking or riding a bike, rather than travelling in a car, are more likely to develop long-term positive physical activity habits, which in turn enhance their overall health and well-being. More so, physically active people are more likely to participate in scheduled sports outside of school and will choose to gather with friends and family in a physically active capacity within their community. Successively, these individuals are also more likely to engage with communities who encourage their residents to favour an active lifestyle and are more likely to demonstrate community strength through greater connectedness and participation, which positively supports their long-term health and well-being.
That's great, Izzy. So many good points there, but unfortunately that's all we have time for today. So I hope you all enjoyed listening to this podcast and that, you have now got a better understanding of nutrition and the problems that are arising within schools. And hopefully this has inspired you to take all the necessary actions to make a difference, as many of the current students today are lacking this knowledge, and it's all so pivotal for their health and well-being. So we need you to change this. But goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time on the Nutrition Plus podcast.